Shocking. Your soulmate was crying today. The reason will surprise you. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because if these words found you today, let them be exactly what they are, a fictional story meant to inspire reflection, healing, and honest communication. It is not a prediction of your future or a claim that a real soulmate is crying because of you. Instead, it is a symbolic journey about how people sometimes awaken to the value of kindness, truth, and emotional growth long after they believed certain chapters of life were over. And your heart needs this right now because sometimes the most meaningful lessons arrive disguised as unexpected emotions. Early this morning, before the world fully awakened, someone quietly sat alone beside a rain-speckled window. Outside, the sky was painted in soft shades of gray as tiny droplets rolled gently down the glass. Everything around them looked ordinary. Cars passed by. Birds searched for breakfast. Neighbors hurried through another familiar day. Yet inside their heart, something extraordinary was happening. They weren't crying because of one dramatic event. They weren't crying because someone had hurt them that morning. The tears arrived quietly. Unexpectedly. Without permission. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. For weeks they had convinced themselves everything was fine. They stayed busy with work, responsibilities, conversations, and routines that filled every empty hour. Whenever old memories surfaced, they pushed them aside, believing that ignoring emotions was the same as healing. But healing doesn't happen because feelings disappear. Healing begins when we finally allow ourselves to understand them. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, they wrapped both hands around a warm cup of tea. The steam rose slowly into the cool morning air, carrying with it a strange feeling of peace mixed with sadness. Something inside whispered, "Stop running." They closed their eyes. For the first time in a very long time. They listened. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. The tears didn't come from regret alone. They came from realization. Realization that life had moved forward while they kept carrying unfinished conversations inside their heart. Realization that silence had become heavier than honesty. Realization that pretending to be strong had prevented them from being truthful with themselves. Outside, a small child walked hand in hand with an elderly grandparent, laughing about something too simple for adults to notice. Watching that moment stirred another memory. A memory of kindness. A memory of patience. A memory they once underestimated. And suddenly, another tear fell. Don't scroll. Listen carefully. Because your heart needs this right now. They reached into an old drawer beside the window and found a notebook they hadn't opened in years. Dust covered its faded leather cover. Inside were handwritten thoughts from another season of life. Dreams. Questions. Goals. Small reminders to never lose hope. One sentence caught their attention immediately. Always choose understanding before assumptions. They stared at those words for several quiet moments. Somehow they had forgotten the promise they once made to themselves. Life had become so busy that understanding had slowly been replaced by conclusions. Compassion had been replaced by certainty. Listening had been replaced by reacting. Their tears continued, not because they felt weak, but because they finally recognized how much wisdom they had left behind. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. Just then, their phone buzzed with a simple message from an old friend. It wasn't about romance. It wasn't about the past. It simply asked, "How have you really been?" Such an ordinary question. Yet it felt impossible to answer. After several minutes of staring at the screen, they typed only 3 words. "Still figuring out." The reply came almost instantly. "That's okay. Most people are." Reading those words somehow made them cry even more. Not because they felt broken, but because someone had given them permission to be honest. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. Later that afternoon, they decided to leave the house and walk through a nearby park. The air smelled fresh after the morning rain. Children laughed near the playground. Couples walked quietly beneath tall trees. An elderly man sat alone feeding birds beside a peaceful lake. Everything looked beautifully ordinary. Yet ordinary moments often become the places where extraordinary understanding quietly begins. Finding an empty bench, they sat down and simply watched the water ripple beneath the gentle breeze. After several peaceful minutes, the elderly man feeding birds smiled kindly and asked, "Long day?" They nodded. Without asking another question, he gently tossed another handful of seeds across the grass before saying, "Sometimes people cry because life hurts." He paused. But sometimes people cry because their heart is finally becoming honest. Those words settled deeply. The stranger knew nothing about them. Yet somehow, he understood everything that mattered. Don't scroll. Listen carefully. Because your heart needs this right now. Walking home, they noticed something they had overlooked for months. The world had never stopped offering beauty. Flowers still bloomed. Birds still sang. Sunset still painted the evening sky. Kind people still smiled at strangers. Hope had never disappeared. They had simply become too distracted to notice it. That realization changed something inside. The tears slowly stopped. Not because every answer had arrived, but because peace had quietly replaced resistance. They no longer wanted to hide from their emotions. They wanted to learn from them. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. That evening they returned home and opened the notebook once again. On a fresh blank page they slowly wrote, "Today I cried. Not because I was defeated. Not because everything was lost. I cried because I finally understood that healing begins the moment we stop pretending we're unaffected." Then they continued writing. "Today I choose patience over panic. Today I choose truth over assumptions. Today I choose compassion over judgment. Today I choose to listen before I react." Reading those words brought a quiet smile. For the first time in many months, their heart felt lighter. Don't scroll. Listen carefully. Because your heart needs this right now. As darkness slowly covered the sky, countless stars appeared above the quiet neighborhood. Standing beside the window once more, they realized something beautiful. The reason they cried today wasn't because life had ended. It wasn't because hope had disappeared. It wasn't because someone was gone forever. They cried because growth often begins with honesty. Because letting go of pride creates space for wisdom. Because every tear had washed away another layer of fear. Tomorrow would bring new conversations. New choices. New opportunities to become kinder than yesterday. And as they gently closed the notebook before bed, one final thought echoed quietly inside their heart. The strongest people are not those who never cry. The strongest people are those who allow their tears to teach them how to love, forgive, and grow with greater compassion. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because if you're still here, this fictional story is unfolding for a reason, not to predict your future, but to remind you how powerful honesty, healing, and self-reflection can be. Your heart needs this right now because sometimes the hardest truth isn't the one we tell someone else. It's the one we finally admit to ourselves. The next morning arrived with quiet sunlight stretching across the room. The rain had passed, leaving the air fresh and the trees sparkling with tiny drops of water. They woke earlier than usual, not because they had slept well, but because something inside refused to return to the old way of living. The tears from yesterday had not disappeared from their memory. Instead, they had washed away enough fear to reveal a question that had been waiting beneath the surface for a very long time. What have I really been running from? Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. For months they believed they were protecting themselves by staying busy. Every hour had been carefully filled with work, responsibilities, endless distractions, and conversations that never touched the deeper parts of their heart. Whenever uncomfortable emotions appeared, they convinced themselves that tomorrow would be a better day to deal with them. Tomorrow became next week. Next week became next month. Eventually, silence became a habit. But silence does not erase truth. It only delays it. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror that morning, they barely recognized the tired expression looking back at them. Not because life had been cruel, but because they had spent so much energy pretending everything was fine. For the first time, they whispered aloud. I'm tired of pretending. The words echoed softly through the empty room. Strangely, they didn't feel frightening. They felt freeing. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. Later that afternoon, they decided to visit a quiet bookstore they hadn't entered in years. It was a peaceful place filled with the comforting scent of old pages and polished wooden shelves. People wandered silently between the aisles, searching for stories that might somehow explain their own. They walked without a destination until one book unexpectedly caught their attention. Its cover simply read, "The Courage to be Honest." They smiled. Not because they believed the book would magically solve every problem, but because life sometimes places simple reminders in front of us exactly when we're ready to receive them. They opened to a random page. The sentence they landed on read: "Healing begins the moment you stop arguing with reality." They closed the book slowly. Something inside them shifted again. Don't scroll. Listen carefully. Because your heart needs this right now. Walking home, they replayed years of memories. Not to judge themselves, but to understand them. They remembered moments when they stayed silent instead of speaking kindly. Moments when fear made decisions that courage should have made. Moments when assumptions replaced honest conversations. They realized something painful. Most of the walls they blamed on life had actually been built by fear. Not fear of failure. Not fear of rejection. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of saying, "This matters to me." Fear of admitting, "I was wrong." Fear of allowing someone to truly know their heart. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. That evening they received another message from the same old friend. This time it simply asked, "Would you like to go for a walk?" They almost declined. Old habits whispered, "Stay home. Avoid people. You'll feel better tomorrow." But instead, they answered, "Yes." An hour later they found themselves walking beside a quiet river as the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. Neither of them rushed to fill the silence. Sometimes friendship doesn't begin with advice. It begins with presence. After several peaceful minutes, the friend quietly asked, "What made you cry yesterday?" The question lingered in the evening air. For a moment, they almost gave the familiar answer. "I'm fine." But this time, they chose differently. "I realized I've been afraid of living honestly." The friend nodded gently. No judgment. No surprise. Only understanding. Then came a response they would never forget. The truth doesn't become dangerous when you speak it. It becomes freeing. Those words settled deeply into their heart. Don't scroll. Listen carefully. Because your heart needs this right now. As darkness covered the river, tiny lights reflected across the water. Watching them dance gently on the surface reminded them that even the smallest light can transform a quiet night. Perhaps honesty worked the same way. Perhaps one truthful conversation could change everything. Not by fixing every problem, but by ending the loneliness that secrecy creates. They walked home beneath a sky filled with stars. For the first time in years, their thoughts felt lighter. Not because every answer had appeared, but because they were finally asking the right questions. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. That night they returned once again to the old notebook. Turning another blank page, they began writing slowly. Today I admitted something I have hidden even from myself. I wasn't protecting my heart. I was protecting my fear. They paused before continuing. Fear convinced me that silence was safer than honesty. Fear convinced me that avoiding difficult conversations would protect me from pain. But fear never gave me peace. It only delayed it. Reading those words brought unexpected calm. The truth had finally found its voice. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Simply. Honestly. Don't scroll. Listen carefully. Because your heart needs this right now. Before going to sleep, they stepped outside one last time. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers from a nearby garden. Somewhere in the distance, wind chimes softly echoed through the night. Everything felt peaceful. Not because life had suddenly become perfect, but because resistance had finally become acceptance. They looked up at the countless stars and quietly smiled. Yesterday, tears had opened the door. Today, honesty had walked through it. Tomorrow, perhaps courage would follow. And with that thought, they whispered one final sentence into the quiet night. Whatever comes next, I want to meet it as my true self. The stars remained silent. Yet somehow, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt hopeful. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because if you've stayed with this fictional story until now, it's not about predicting your future or revealing hidden messages from a real soulmate. It's about the quiet moments that help us understand ourselves more deeply. And your heart needs this right now because sometimes the conversation that changes your life isn't the one you expect, it's the one you've been avoiding for far too long. The following afternoon, they found themselves returning to the same peaceful park where they had sat only days before. The weather had changed. The rain clouds were gone, replaced by a clear blue sky that seemed to stretch endlessly above the trees. Children laughed near the playground, cyclists passed by with cheerful smiles, and gentle breezes carried the scent of blooming flowers across the walking paths. Everything around them looked peaceful. Yet inside, they knew today would be different. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. They weren't waiting for someone else to appear. They weren't expecting a dramatic reunion. Instead, they had made a quiet promise to themselves. Today, I will stop hiding from the truth. For years they had believed that difficult conversations always ended in conflict. They assumed honesty would only create distance. But after everything they had learned over the past few days, they were beginning to understand something important. Honesty doesn't always create separation. Sometimes, it creates freedom. As they walked slowly beside the lake, they noticed an elderly woman sitting alone on a bench reading a worn-out novel. Every few pages she smiled softly, as though the story reminded her of someone she had loved long ago. When she looked up, their eyes met for only a moment. She smiled warmly. Not the kind of smile that asks questions. The kind that simply says, "I hope you're doing okay." Somehow, that simple kindness felt like another reminder that the world still held goodness. Don't scroll. Listen carefully. Because your heart needs this right now. Later that evening, they received another message from the friend who had walked beside them the night before. Would you like to talk? This time they didn't hesitate. Instead of meeting outdoors, they visited a quiet little cafe tucked away on a peaceful street. Soft music played in the background while people spoke gently over cups of coffee and tea. For several minutes neither of them spoke. There was no pressure. No expectation. Finally, the friend asked, "What have you learned about yourself?" The question lingered quietly between them. They looked down at their hands before answering. "I spent so much time waiting for life to change that I forgot I could change too." The friend nodded. "What else?" After another thoughtful pause, they replied, "I kept blaming circumstances for my loneliness when I was the one refusing to open my heart." Hearing those words spoken aloud felt strangely comforting. Because once truth is spoken, it no longer needs to hide. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. The conversation continued for hours. Not about romance. Not about regret. But about life. About dreams that had been postponed. About forgiveness that had never been offered. About apologies they still hoped to make one day. They laughed about old memories. They admitted old mistakes. They shared fears they had never spoken before. For the first time in years, they realized that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was trust. The friend listened carefully before saying something they would carry forever. You don't have to become a different person to deserve peace. You only have to become an honest one. Those words settled gently into their heart. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. Walking home beneath the evening sky, they noticed something remarkable. Nothing around them had changed. The same streets. The same buildings. The same familiar neighborhood. Yet everything felt different. Why? Because they were seeing the world through different eyes. Eyes no longer clouded by constant fear. Eyes beginning to notice possibility instead of disappointment. When they reached home, they opened the old notebook again. On a fresh page they wrote, "Today I stopped waiting for someone else to rescue me. Today I realized healing is something I participate in. Today I chose honesty instead of hiding." Reading those words brought another smile. Not a smile of excitement. A smile of peace. Don't scroll. Listen carefully. Because your heart needs this right now. That night they decided to call someone they hadn't spoken with in a long time. Not to revisit old conflicts. Not to demand explanations. Simply to say, "I hope you're doing well." The conversation was short. Kind. Respectful. When it ended, they didn't feel as though every problem had disappeared. But another burden had quietly lifted. They understood something important. Closure isn't always something another person gives you. Sometimes closure begins when you choose kindness instead of resentment. As midnight approached, they stepped outside once again. The stars shimmered brightly above the quiet neighborhood. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves in nearby trees. Standing beneath the night sky, they reflected on everything that had happened over the past few days. The tears. The notebook. The conversations. Each moment had been leading them toward the same truth. Real strength isn't pretending nothing hurts. Real strength is allowing pain to become wisdom instead of bitterness. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. They closed their eyes for a moment and whispered. Thank you for every lesson that helped me become more compassionate. For the first time in a very long while. Their heart felt peaceful enough to welcome tomorrow instead of fearing it. The journey wasn't finished. There were still conversations ahead. Still choices to make. Still opportunities to grow. But now they understood that growth wasn't about becoming perfect. It was about becoming authentic. As they returned inside and gently closed the notebook for the night, one final realization echoed through their heart. The greatest conversation I ever had wasn't with someone else. It was the honest conversation I finally had with myself. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because if you've stayed with this fictional story until now, perhaps it isn't because you were searching for someone else's answers. Perhaps it's because your own heart has been quietly asking questions you've never spoken aloud. And your heart needs this right now because every meaningful journey eventually reaches a moment where fear no longer gets the final word. The next morning arrived with an unusual sense of peace. Sunlight streamed gently through the curtains, filling the room with a warm golden glow. Birds sang outside the open window, and the cool morning breeze carried the scent of fresh rain from the night before. For the first time in a long while, they didn't wake up feeling rushed by yesterday or anxious about tomorrow. They simply sat in silence, letting themselves appreciate the quiet. Sometimes healing doesn't announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives as the first peaceful morning you've had in years. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. They reached for the familiar notebook resting beside the bed. The pages were filled with reflections, questions, moments of gratitude, and lessons gathered through difficult seasons. Turning to a fresh page, they wrote only one sentence. I no longer want to live a life led by fear. The words looked simple. But they carried the weight of countless hidden battles. For years they had waited for perfect timing before speaking honestly. Perfect timing before forgiving. Perfect timing before believing in themselves. Then they realized something life-changing. Perfect timing rarely arrives first. Courage comes first. Then timing begins to open its doors. Don't scroll. Listen carefully. Because your heart needs this right now. Later that afternoon they returned to the same cafe where they had shared that long conversation only days before. The owner smiled warmly as they walked inside, recognizing them without saying much. They ordered the same cup of tea and chose the same table by the window. Everything looked familiar. But they weren't the same person anymore. Looking outside, they watched strangers pass by. A father laughing with his daughter. Two elderly friends enjoying a slow walk together. A young couple helping each other carry groceries. Ordinary moments. Simple moments. Yet suddenly they understood that happiness isn't usually hidden inside extraordinary events. It quietly lives inside ordinary kindness. Inside conversations. Inside forgiveness. Inside showing up honestly for the people we love. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. That evening they received another message from their friend. How are you feeling today? Without overthinking, they answered honestly. Peaceful. The reply came almost immediately. That's beautiful. Only 2 words. Yet somehow they meant more than pages of advice. Because sometimes healing doesn't require complicated answers. Sometimes it only needs someone willing to witness your growth. As the days continued passing, something unexpected happened. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still difficult mornings. Still moments of uncertainty. Still questions without immediate answers. But those moments no longer controlled them. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" they began asking, "What can this experience teach me?" That small shift changed everything. Don't scroll. Listen carefully. Because your heart needs this right now. One quiet weekend they decided to revisit places that once carried painful memories. The old bookstore where they had once waited for someone who never arrived. The park bench where tears had once fallen without anyone noticing. The bridge where they had questioned whether hope still existed. Standing in those familiar places, they noticed something remarkable. The locations hadn't changed. Only the person standing there had. The sadness they once carried had slowly transformed into wisdom. Not because time erased the memories, but because understanding gave those memories a different meaning. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't forgetting the past. It's remembering it without losing your peace. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. That evening they opened the notebook one final time. The last empty page waited quietly. After thinking for several minutes, they began writing. If someone ever reads these pages, I hope they don't see a story about heartbreak. I hope they see a story about becoming brave enough to love life again. I hope they remember that kindness always matters. That forgiveness creates freedom. That gratitude changes perspective. And that honesty is one of the greatest gifts we can offer ourselves and others. Reading those words filled their heart with quiet gratitude. Not because every dream had already come true, but because they had become someone capable of welcoming whatever tomorrow might bring. Don't scroll. Listen carefully. Because your heart needs this right now. As the sun slowly disappeared beneath the horizon, they stepped outside one final time. The evening sky glowed with soft shades of orange, purple, and deep blue. The first stars quietly appeared overhead. They closed their eyes and smiled. Not because someone else had completed them. Not because every uncertainty had vanished. But because they had finally discovered something they had searched for everywhere else. Peace had been growing inside them all along. It simply needed space to be heard. The wind gently rustled the trees as if the world itself had become quieter. They whispered softly. Whatever tomorrow brings, I'll meet it with honesty, hope, and compassion. And for the first time in many years, those words felt completely true. Don't scroll. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. If this story leaves you with one thought, let it be this. The greatest love is not proven by dramatic signs or mysterious messages. It is reflected in the everyday choices to be honest, to forgive, to appreciate the people around us, to care for ourselves, and to keep hope alive even after disappointment. Real transformation begins the moment we stop waiting for life to change us and start choosing the person we want to become. And as they closed the notebook forever, they realized the journey had never truly been about finding someone else. It had always been about finding the courage to become fully themselves. The future remained unwritten. But for the first time, that no longer felt frightening. It felt full of possibility.